The dinner table was never just a place to eat. It was where my life was measured, where silence carried as much weight as words. Growing up, I understood quickly that praise was never unconditional. It always came laced with comparison. Always. Framed against the shadow of my brother's achievements. If he brought home perfect grades, the room lit with approval. If I did the same, the question was what else I should have done better. Don't miss the twist. Like this story and follow. Me before I share the next part, I learned to anticipate it. The raised eyebrow, the sigh that lingered longer than it should. The way my mother's voice shifted when she spoke about Gabriel versus when she spoke about me. He was steady, reliable, exactly what they had hoped for. I was the one who talked. Too much in class. The one who filled notebooks with drawings instead of equations. Even when I excelled, it was never enough. That evening, the pattern repeated itself in quiet, predictable ways. My mother passed dishes around with her usual efficiency, her voice carrying updates about relatives who were climbing higher, moving, faster, achieving more. Every success story from cousins or family friends landed at the table like a warning shot, a reminder of what I had failed to become. I sat there, nodding at the right moments, pretending the food on my plate mattered, more than the weight in the air. Inside, I felt the familiar ache. Years of it had trained me to hide behind polite smiles, to keep my posture straight and my voice calm, no matter how much the words cut. "Tell us about your work," my father said, not looking directly at me. His tone was casual, but I recognized. The trap? I cleared my throat. "We just finished a campaign for a nonprofit. It's focused on heart disease awareness. The response has been—" He interrupted with a short nod. "That's good. But how stable is it? Advertising changes. People always need doctors." I didn't respond right away. My fork hovered above my plate as I forced myself to breathe, evenly. This was how it always went. My brother's work in medicine was noble, unquestionable. Mine was temporary, fragile, destined to collapse. Gabriel shifted slightly beside me, as if he felt the tension, but he said nothing. He never did. In his silence, I could hear his loyalty. To them, not to me. The conversation moved on, but the heaviness stayed. Every comment, every glance, carried layers built over years. My mother asked about my rent in New York, my savings, my plans for graduate school, and something more serious. Her words were framed as concern, but I heard the disappointment threaded through them. I smiled politely, replying with phrases I had practiced. "I'll consider that. It's something I'm looking into." Lies that kept the peace, but eroded me quietly. As plates were cleared, I thought back to childhood evenings that felt exactly the same. I remembered sitting at this very table with worksheets spread across the surface, my mother hovering over me while my father asked Gabriel to explain math problems I already knew the answers to. I remembered the sting of hearing, "Why can't you focus like your brother?" and how I swallowed tears, determined not to give them more proof of my weakness. The patterns had never changed, only grown sharper as I got older. What began as subtle comparisons became direct dismissals, and eventually outright rejection of the things I cared about. And yet, I kept showing up. I kept trying. That night, as I pushed food around my plate, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by those evenings. The way I worked, the way I loved, even the way I doubted myself, all of it traced back to this table. I had learned to measure myself not by what I felt, but by what I imagined would make them proud. And somehow, it never did. "Gabriel just got another paper accepted," my mother said with pride. "His professor says it could change the way they approach treatment." The room buzzed with admiration. I clapped softly, keeping my expression neutral. Then her eyes landed on me. "And you're still at the same company?" Her words weren't cruel on the surface, but I heard what was underneath. A lack of movement, a lack of growth, a lack of worth. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I was promoted recently." "That's nice," she replied, turning her attention back to Gabriel. That phrase, "that's nice," had followed me through every milestone. Graduations, awards, job offers. It was the punctuation mark on my life. Dismissive, quiet, final. By the time dessert was served, I felt my chest tightening, not from anger, but from exhaustion. It wasn't just one dinner. It was the weight of every dinner before it. Every moment where I had been reminded that I was an accessory to their pride, never its centerpiece. As I placed my fork down, I caught myself wondering when I had last felt truly seen. The answer didn't come. I looked around the table, at my father's steady frown, at my mother's calculating smile, at Gabriel's practiced silence. And I realized something. This wasn't about me failing them. It was about them never wanting to see me clearly in the first place. I didn't say anything then. I kept my voice inside, where it had always stayed. But something shifted. For the first time, I felt the faint spark of defiance beneath the heaviness. The quiet sense that I could no longer carry their expectations without losing myself completely. Didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the weight was no longer mine to bear alone. It never happened all at once. The breaking was slow, stretched across years, disguised as discipline and care. At first, I thought every family worked this way, that love had to be earned and that mistakes were debts you could never repay. My parents never yelled, not the way other kids' parents did. Their criticism was quieter, sharper, a steady drip that eroded me more completely than anger ever could. I remember sitting in our small kitchen, homework spread across the table, while other children played outside. My mother would stand behind me, arms crossed, reminding me that excellence was the minimum. "Do it again," she'd say when I got a question right, but wrote the answer too slowly. "You'll never succeed if you can't be faster." It wasn't that I failed often. I didn't, but in that house, failure was defined differently. An A was fine, but why not an A+? Winning first place at the science fair was nice, but why wasn't I also captain of the math club? Their expectations weren't milestones. They were moving targets. Gabriel, my brother, adapted to it in a way I never could. He absorbed their pressure like fuel. He learned to sit still, to listen without questioning, to nod at their instructions like they were laws. His report cards glowed, his test scores shone, and their approval flowed toward him in ways that made it clear there was only so much to go around. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" my father would ask, not in anger but in resignation, as if he already knew the answer and was only reminding me of the truth. Each small cut left its mark. When I showed them my drawings, my father would say, "That's nice, but don't waste. Too much time." When I told them I wanted to apply for an art program, my mother shook her head. "College is for doctors and lawyers. Not for doodling." I learned to hide my joy in small things. I kept sketchbooks under my bed, writing late at night when I should have been studying. I celebrated my victories quietly, a teacher's praise, a friend's encouragement, and kept them secret, because bringing them into the light only meant they'd be dismissed. By middle school, I had stopped expecting recognition. Instead, I became my own harshest critic, measuring myself by their impossible standards. I pushed harder, slept less, drove myself toward achievements that never felt like achievements at all. Anxiety settled into my body like a permanent guest. Before tests, I'd feel my stomach twist, my hands shake, even though I always passed. The fear wasn't about failing. It was about being told that even success wasn't enough. The truth is, I wanted their approval more than I wanted anything else. I wanted to hear my name spoken with pride, to be seen for who I was rather than who they wanted me to be. But the gap between us only grew wider. High school made it worse. That's when my art teacher noticed something in me, something beyond. The numbers and grades. She told me I had a voice, that my work carried weight. When she encouraged me to apply for a summer art program, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in years. The day I got in, with a scholarship no less, I thought maybe things would finally shift. I sat at the dinner table that night, letter in hand, waiting for them to share my excitement. My father put his fork down and stared at me. "Art? What good is art? You're not wasting a summer on that." I tried to explain, tried to frame it in a way they'd understand. "It'll look great on college applications. Many students from this program go on to top universities." But my mother shook her head. "College is for serious study, not drawing pictures." Gabriel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence was the same silence that had defined our whole childhood, the silence of someone who had already chosen the safe side. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, but beneath the tears, I felt something else. A tiny crack in the belief that my happiness and their approval had to be the same thing. I went to the program anyway. I lied and told them it was a general academic camp, and for the first time, I stepped outside of their rules. Those 6 weeks changed me. Surrounded by people who celebrated creativity, who valued expression over perfection, I caught a glimpse of a different kind of life, one where I didn't have to shrink, but when I came home, the weight returned. At the dinner table, their questions resumed. What did you learn that will help you in college? How will this get you into medical school? I didn't argue. I nodded, smiled, and tucked the experience deep inside me where they couldn't touch it. Over the years, these cuts stacked up. Small dismissals, cold comparisons, withheld affection. And though none of them alone was fatal, together they built an invisible cage. I lived inside it, convinced that if I just tried harder, if I just became more, maybe one day I'd finally hear what I longed for. But the truth is, no amount of achievement could ever bend them toward me. And though I didn't realize it yet, each small cut was leading me toward a breaking point that would change everything. The evening had unfolded with its usual rhythm, plates being passed, stories about relatives, polite nods at achievements that belonged to everyone but me. I had grown used to the background noise of comparison, the way my parents lifted Gabriel onto a pedestal and left me at the base, expected to climb without help. But that night, something shifted. It started small. My mother leaned across the table, her smile practiced. Esperanza, are you still working at that little company? Her tone wasn't cruel, not outright, but the phrasing carried the same weight it always had. Little, temporary, not enough. I held my fork steady. I was promoted to senior design director last month. We just won a national award for our campaign with the American Heart Association. I let myself hope, just for a second. Hope that maybe this time my achievement would matter. That's nice, she said, her smile already moving past me. But is there opportunity for advancement? What's the next step toward a real career? A real career. My chest tightened, but I forced my voice to stay even. Design is my real career. I'm very successful at it. My father's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. His gaze was sharp, his tone deliberate. Successful is a relative term. Your brother is saving lives with his research. That is meaningful work. The air around the table grew heavier. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. I felt heat rise in my face, but I didn't back down. Different work can be meaningful in different ways, I said. The campaign we launched is projected to encourage thousands of women to get preventative screenings. That matters. My aunt tried to break the tension, talking about her son's new law job. My mother joined in, her voice bright. That's the kind of stability parents hope for. Security, respect, a clear path forward. It was always the same. Stability, tradition, status. The unspoken truth was that my work, my choices, my life didn't fit their vision. I tried another approach. Design drives business now. Companies like Apple have shown. My father cut me off with a wave of his hand. Trends come and go. Companies will always need doctors, lawyers, engineers. That is real contribution. What you're doing is self-indulgence. The words struck like blows. But I kept my posture still. Inside, something fragile was bending, close to breaking. Then came the moment I never expected. Though in truth, it had been building my whole life. He leaned back in his chair, his voice calm, almost casual. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Then we wouldn't have to see so much potential thrown away. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. At first, I wasn't sure I had heard him right. Then the silence confirmed it. No one spoke. No one moved. My cousin gasped. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. Gabriel's wife looked down at her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the cruelty in the room. I stared at my father, but I didn't see him. I saw every night spent at that table, every dismissal, every time I had swallowed my voice to keep the peace. The words he had just spoken weren't new. They were the truth behind everything he'd ever said to me. My mother broke first. "Carlos, that's not what you meant," she said quickly, her voice desperate to smooth over the wreckage. "He was joking. You know how he—" "No," I said, my voice steady in a way that startled me. "He wasn't joking, and neither am I." The room froze again. All my life I had kept quiet, carried the weight, accepted the cuts. But something cracked open inside me, and once it broke, there was no going back. I placed my napkin carefully on the table, the scrape of my chair loud in the silence. I stood tall, even though my hands trembled at my sides. "Perfect," I said. "Then you won't need me when you're old." Gasps rippled around the table. My father's face hardened into anger. My mother's hand clutched at her necklace, her voice trembling. "Esperanza, don't be dramatic. Sit down. We'll talk about this later." "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied. My voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air sharper than shouting ever could. Gabriel shifted in his seat, his face pale. Then, in a voice that surprised everyone, he said, "Dad, that was out of line. You can't tell her you wish she was never born and expect her to stay silent." My mother's eyes widened, shocked at his defiance. "Gabriel, please, not now." "When is the time, Mom?" His voice was low, firm. "You've treated her like this for years. I've watched it. I stayed quiet. But not tonight." For a moment, the world tilted. Gabriel, their golden child, standing beside me. It didn't erase the years of silence, but it cracked the foundation of their control. My father's face flushed, his authority fractured in front of everyone. "This is between us and our daughter. Stay out of it." But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped. The truth was laid bare in front of everyone. Family, friends, witnesses who could never unhear it. I felt strangely detached, almost weightless. Years of therapy had prepared me for the possibility of rejection, but I had never imagined the freedom that would follow it. The worst thing I had feared my entire life had happened, and I was still standing. I picked up my purse, thanked everyone for coming, and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. No one called me back. At the threshold, I turned once, just enough to meet Gabriel's eyes. He gave me a small nod, a gesture of solidarity I had longed for since childhood. Then I stepped outside into the cool desert night. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was mine. The door closed behind me with a weight that felt final. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dark, the night air pressing cool against my skin. Inside, voices murmured in a storm I no longer belonged to. Out here, the silence was clean. My legs moved before my mind caught up. Down the path, across the gravel, toward the car parked at the edge of the driveway. Each step felt strangely steady, like I had been rehearsing this walk my whole life without knowing it. I expected my hands to tremble, my voice to crack. But they didn't. For once, I wasn't collapsing under the weight of their disappointment. Sliding into the driver's seat, I shut the door and gripped the wheel. The house glowed behind me, filled with laughter that wasn't laughter, warmth that was performance. I started the engine and pulled away, the tires crunching against the gravel like punctuation marks to a chapter finally closing. 2 blocks. Away the first tear fell, then another. By the time I turned into an empty church parking lot, I was sobbing, hands pressed to the steering wheel, forehead bent low. 32 years of swallowed pain came rushing out at once. 32 years of measuring myself against a ruler that was never meant for me. But beneath the tears, something else stirred. Not anger, not despair. Relief. The words I had dreaded all my life had finally been spoken. They had said they wished I was never born, and I was still here, still breathing, still standing. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the screen lighting up with messages. Missed calls from my mother, a text from a cousin. That was horrible. You didn't deserve it. Another from my Aunt Teresa, call me if you need to talk. And then, most surprising of all, from Gabriel. Where are you staying? Can I come see you? I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, staring at his words. For years, Gabriel had been the one who benefited from my silence, the chosen child, the mirror of their pride. And yet, in that room, he had broken his silence. too. Something had shifted. At the hotel, I checked my reflection before answering the knock at the door. My face was puffy, eyes red, but I didn't care anymore. When I opened it, Gabriel stood there, his tie loosened, his expression raw in a way I'd never seen before. I should have said something years ago, he admitted as soon as he stepped inside. His voice carried no defense, no excuses. I watched them cut you down, bit by bit, and I stayed quiet because it was easier for me when their focus wasn't on me. His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw not just the brother who had been their pride, but a man who had carried his own prison. I thought if I followed their plan, it would protect me, he continued. But it didn't. It just kept me trapped. The difference is, you had the courage to walk your own path. I never did. I sank onto the edge of the bed, listening, the room thick with years of unspoken truths. His words didn't erase the silence of the past, but they softened it. We talked until midnight, about childhood, about expectations, about the way love in our house had always been conditional. For once, it wasn't me defending my life. It was us, side by side, unraveling. The reality we had both lived but experienced differently. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "I don't know, but for the first time, it feels like my decision to make." When the door clicked shut behind him, I sat in the quiet. The city hummed faint in the distance. It struck me then, dignity doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes in the stillness, in choosing to stand even when your voice shakes. That night, I hadn't shouted. I hadn't thrown accusations. I had simply refused to sit back down. For years, I had thought power meant convincing them, proving my worth, finally hearing the words I longed for. But true power, I realized, was walking away without needing them to understand. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The heaviness in my chest hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. I no longer carried it alone. I got coffee from the small hotel cafe and sat by the window watching the sunlight creep across the parking lot. For once, I let myself just be. No performance, no armor. I thought about what Gabriel had said, about courage. It didn't feel like courage in the moment. It felt like survival. But maybe survival was its own kind of bravery. My phone buzzed again. More missed calls from my mother, another long voicemail I didn't listen to. Their narrative would already be forming, that I was dramatic, sensitive, ungrateful. I had been cast as the problem for so long that I knew they would cling to it. But now, for the first time, their story didn't have to be mine. As I packed my bag later that day, I realized something quiet but profound. I had left the table, and I hadn't crumbled. I had stood without shaking. And once you know you can stand, it becomes harder to kneel again. The days after the dinner blurred together, though not in the way I expected. I thought I'd collapse under the weight of it, replaying the words until they hollowed me out. Instead, there was a strange stillness, like the silence after glass shatters. The mess was undeniable, but so was the fact that it couldn't be put back the way it was. My phone didn't stop ringing. Calls from my mother at all hours. Short texts from my father, factual, cold, no acknowledgement of what he'd said. From relatives, the messages split into two groups, some urging me to apologize and keep the peace, others quietly telling me I had been brave. Each notification carried its own pull, dragging me between guilt and clarity. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sound of their voices still lived inside me, the echo of that sentence replaying with every vibration of my phone. Sometimes we wish you were never born. It was the kind of wound that didn't bleed on the surface, but left a mark you could feel in your bones. On the third day, I canceled work meetings and told my team I wasn't well. It was the first time I had ever admitted needing space. Normally, I kept going, powering through deadlines, showing up even when my body screamed for rest. But now, exhaustion pinned me down, and for once, I let it. Therapy became my anchor. Dr. Richardson's office was quiet, lined with muted bookshelves, and soft light that didn't demand anything from me. I told her everything. The sentence, the silence, Gabriel's unexpected defense. She listened without judgment. then said words that would stay with me. You've spent your life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That isn't love. That's control. Hearing it out loud loosened something in me. For years, I had rationalized their behavior. They were strict, they were traditional, they sacrificed everything. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, maybe I was too sensitive. But the truth was simpler and harder. Their love had always been conditional. Still, letting go of that old hope wasn't easy. I found myself staring at my phone late at night, fighting the urge to call them, to smooth it over, to play my old role. The child who apologizes first, the daughter who bends. My thumb hovered over the screen more than once, but each time I set it down. Gabriel called me instead. His voice was tired, like mine. He told me about the aftermath in the house. The way our parents spun the story, painting themselves as misunderstood, saying I had overreacted to a joke. They don't see it, he admitted. They really believe they did nothing wrong. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's their gift, I said quietly. They can wound you and convince themselves it was for your own good. Silence lingered on the line, heavy with decades we could never get back. But something about his presence, even through the phone, reminded me I wasn't completely alone. The grief hit harder when the nights grew quiet. I'd sit in my small apartment, the city lights flickering outside, and feel the weight of everything I had lost. It wasn't just the dream of their approval, it was the idea of family itself, the image I had carried like a compass, always pointing back to them. Now, the compass was broken, and I was left to find my own direction. But beneath the grief was something else, something I hadn't expected. Space. Without their voices filling every corner of my mind, I began to hear my own more clearly. I caught myself humming while making coffee, smiling at work without worrying if it was good enough. Even the silence in my apartment felt different, less like loneliness, more like peace. One evening, Jennifer, my mentor, invited me over. I sat in her living room, wine glass in hand, words spilling out before I could stop them. I told her about the dinner, the fight, the walkout. I braced for pity, but she gave me none. Instead, she said, "Family is not always who you're born to. Sometimes family is who you choose." Her words settled into me like truth I had been circling around for years. Maybe family didn't have to be defined by obligation or blood. Maybe it could be chosen, built out of people who saw me as whole without condition. The shift was slow but real. I started making small decisions differently. I stopped sharing my victories with my parents, sparing myself their dismissals. I limited calls to Gabriel, who became my bridge to the house I had left. I poured more into friendships, dinners with people who cheered for me without comparison. It wasn't a perfect replacement, but it was something alive, something real. Still, the ache remained. Every time my phone lit up with my mother's number, every voicemail filled with guilt or denial, the wound pulsed again. But each time I chose not to answer, I realized I was choosing myself instead. One night, alone in bed, I whispered into the dark, "I'm allowed to want more." It wasn't defiance, it wasn't anger, it was permission. Permission to stop, bending under the weight of expectations that were never mine to carry. Permission to stand. By the end of that first month, the shattering no longer felt like an end. It felt like the first crack of light through a door I hadn't dared to open. I didn't know what the path ahead looked like, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking back. I thought the hard part would be the night itself, but it was the mornings after that taught me what healing looks like. It wasn't dramatic. It was grocery lists, paid bills, folded laundry, and messages I chose not to return. Weeks turned into months, and the habit of explaining myself thinned like fog in sunlight. I began speaking less to defend my life, and more to live it. At work, a shift arrived before I named it. Ideas came without permission. I stopped shrinking at the conference table, stopped softening my voice before sharing a pitch. When a client asked who led the campaign, I said, "I did," and didn't flinch. Jennifer said, "Keep that." I did. I stayed. Sundays became mine. I cooked simple food, roasted vegetables, warm bread, a pot of something that made the apartment smell like invitation. Friends came with stories and unasked for desserts. We sat on mismatched chairs. No one took attendance. When someone shared a small win, the room clapped like relief. It wasn't a performance, it was a life. Gabriel visited once and stood in my doorway holding a pie. We talked late, not about our parents, but about music and the heavy quiet of hospitals. Before he left, he asked, shy, "Do you think it can ever be different with them?" I took a breath. Different, maybe. Easy, no. He nodded, as if permission had been given to stop pretending. Calls from home softened around the edges. Fewer lectures, more weather updates. My father phoned one afternoon and said, "I saw your work, the Children's Hospital campaign." He paused. It was good. Not everything I had once wanted, but for the first time, he didn't add what I should do next. I said, "Thank you," and we let the silence stand. I learned boundaries the way you learn an instrument. Slowly. With repetition. I declined invitations that came with strings. I visited when I had the strength and left before I didn't. When old patterns tried to pull me back, I used short responses that were true and kind. I'm not discussing that. I'm leaving now. No. The smallest words steadied. Me most, I began mentoring younger designers, many from families like mine. One of them, Lucia, twisted a straw wrapper into a tight coil and whispered, "They say I'm wasting my scholarship." I said, "You're not responsible for carrying anyone's dream but your own." Later, she emailed a photo of her first studio badge. I printed it and taped it above my desk. There were still days that hurt, holidays especially, the choreography of calls and cards. I went to Gabriel's first child's baptism and kept a seat near the aisle. My mother complimented my dress without adding what would make it better. During the reception, my father stood beside me with a paper cup of coffee and said, almost to himself, "You've built something." I didn't ask him to name it. Quiet. Revenge is the refusal to disappear. It's turning down the volume on voices that misnamed you and turning up the ones that recognize you when you walk into your own life. Mine sounded like laughter in my kitchen, like the scratch of a pen across a new brief, like the soft click of my door when I felt safe. On the 1-year mark, I hosted dinner for the people who carried me. Friends, a mentor, a neighbor who waters. My plants. We raised our glasses to nothing grand, just to being here. Someone asked if I ever missed how it used to be. I said, I miss what I wanted it to be, and the grief bowed and made room for gratitude. I still answer some calls. I still hang up when I must. Progress is quiet that way. It looks like leaving a conversation before it takes your voice. It looks like staying when staying is honest. It looks like a table set for who actually shows up. When the night settles and the apartment goes still, I sometimes think about that long ago sentence and how it tried to erase me. Then I look around, at the dishes drying by the sink, at the sketches taped to the wall, at the spare chair we pull close when someone needs to be witnessed, and I realize something permanent. I am here. No permission required. Stay for tea, I say now when someone lingers at the door. I pour 2 cups. We take our seats, and the table holds. Do you think I did the right thing or the wrong thing? Comment your thoughts. Your like and follow motivate me to share more stories.